We usually neurodiverge into several different places as we.
Just
And I'm like, oh, that's a good place to kind of pick up and to go on. I kind of want to tell you this on the after hours one, but I figure I'll tell you now because it kind of does like relate to employee engagement in my mindset when these surveys come out because I get nervous. Like as a leader, it's
okay.
really nerve wracking. Like, not that I don't think I'm a good leader, right? But like, okay, did my team take them? Because one, we always push them. And then two, what are they going to say? Like,
Right.
well, you should be honest on them, but I never know. So anyways, so my mom sends me this note I wrote. And she didn't have the year on it. I can't, she's like, I don't know when you wrote this, but she thought it was to her because the person that I wrote it to, they have the same name. But we were childhood friends because she's her goddaughter. So in this note, hold on, I have to look at it so I could actually read this to you because it is hysterical. Like this little note that I wrote with my little handwriting. Let me find it. She sent me when Kayla wrote too. That was so cute. He
Okay.
thought she was the nicest relative because she can get him anything.
That's a big
So
deal when you're a kid.
I'm gonna leave the name out to who I wrote this to, just in case they ever. Well, I mean, we were kids. It doesn't matter, right? Like I can totally say this. I wrote this as a kid. I was upset. I was hurt, Danielle. I don't know, and I don't know where this thought process came from, but it says, "Dear Eunice, you don't like me, do you? You always stick up for Melissa. Is she your angel?" And then it says, "Please turn over." The second side says, "Do you like my bed? I'm really sorry it only fits one person. From Jenny." So at a very young age, I'm like, I didn't like that you did this, but do you like my bed?
Right. Well, it's funny that I just remember like writing those types of notes and things when you're a kid, and you had to specify that you needed to turn over to see the other side. Like you wouldn't naturally do that or know that there was writing on the other side. That's such a kid thing to do. Like
But
turn,
turn over.
yeah.
And it was just so like the sides were just so like, I'm upset about this. And like, where did I get the idea that if someone doesn't like you, it means you're not an angel? Or if they like someone else, it means that's their angel. Where did this even come from?
Are they your angel? Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
so Melissa's my sister, right?
right.
So I remember like I was really young. This could be like first grade, something like that, because it has to be first or second grade because until I went to elementary school in Bolingbrook, it's Illinois, I was called Jay or Jennifer, right? And they were doing the name on the mailbox. You know how you had those little mailboxes and they would have to punch in the letters and they would stick your name on the mailbox.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So I'm a new student and I go to the school. Like I said, first, second grade. So Jamie McGee was the school, elementary school. And the teacher asked me, she goes, "Do you have a shorter name?" This is a theme all my life. "Do you have a shorter name? And what does your family call you? Or what do you go by?" So I was like, well, Jennifer, Knippenberg. It's a very long name to punch in the little things. And the mailbox thing would have been, really long.
Well, it's not that much shorter than Jennifer. Like,
So they were like, she goes, what does your family call you?" And I said, Jay. And so she's like, "How do you spell that?" And I said, "Well, Jay." And
oh,
there was some little boy that laughed at me and said, "Oh, Jay, that's spelled like a boy's name." So I look at the teacher, was like, "Fine, just put Jenny." So that's how I became Jenny all through
okay.
elementary, junior high, high school. And then when I went to Vegas, I became Jennifer again, or then sometimes they would shorten it to Jen, but I lost this. So I can segment people like how I know them based on what they call me.
Okay. Yeah, I had like a family nickname but I never, and Danielle was a long name for little
Yeah.
kids to spell. And it wasn't very popular when I was a kid, so there wasn't a lot of things out there with the name. So it used to drive me crazy. I would have preferred to have a name like Jennifer or Lisa or something that was more common at that time. But I hated when anybody would call me Danny because I thought it was a boy's name and it reminded me of Danny from the Partridge Family.
Hmm.
And I was like, I don't want people to think I'm Danny from the Partridge Family, which I don't know where that logic came from because, like, why would anybody think that? But, when you're a kid, that's what you think.
Yep.
So
You do. Like, as soon as a boy laughed at me and said, "That's a boy's name," I was
you're
like,
like,
"All right,
fine,
fine.
I'll be
Just
Jenny.
call me Jenny then." And then my cousin would call me Jay. She always called me JJ, and she spelled it Jay. That
Okay.
so I would tell her, "Stop calling me JJ at school. Like, people are gonna think." I don't know why I cared. Like, and then later in life, I was like, "Why don't you call me JJ anymore?" Like, I like that. I miss that. And you would always sign my stuff from J.
Right. Well, I think
Yeah.
when you're a little kid, and especially when you're going to school, those first 2 years are so critical to your identity and
Hmm.
figuring out who you are. And so when somebody calls you the wrong name or a name you don't like, it hits different than it does if you're older, I think. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Or if they
I
make
think,
fun of your name because it's so close to your identity.
yeah.
So,
And then at work, like it got shortened again to Jen. You know, someone's like, "Oh, your name's so long. Can we just call you something different?" And like, "Can I just call you Jen?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure, whatever." And then it stuck, and I started writing it, and I'm like, "I'm the name, not against any Jens out there." I'm like, I don't feel like I'm a Jen. You know, I
right.
feel
Yeah,
like
it'd be
Jens are
call
certain
me Dan.
ways.
I
Oh,
wouldn't call
I went
Dan.
back to Jennifer, and everyone had get used to calling me Jennifer. I think you even struggle with that because I was Jen for so long, and then I
Yeah.
switched to
Yeah.
Jennifer.
I think it's just sort of now I don't really struggle with it, but I think I did for a while. But I had a hard time calling you JFK. Like everybody would call
Oh
you,
yeah,
and I'm
yep.
like, yeah, that's fine if you want to call her that, but that feels weird to me. But that's who
Yeah,
you
see, I
were.
like the JFK, and I used to sign like when I was in
Yeah,
kindergarten. I used to sign my name. Like I found this paper from way back, and I used to sign my name Jennifer, and then JFK, and then Jennifer Francine. Like those are the three. Those were the three signatures that I always did. So it made sense to me. And my dad, you know, there was a whole reason why my name was Jennifer, and then my middle name had to be an F and all that stuff. So
okay,
like, yeah, there was like there's a tie-in to it. So
okay, yeah,
I
that makes
liked it because my family sometimes would call me that too. Or my dad, you know, he would refer to me as, you know, JFK or J, most of the time J. So, and he would spell it J. So,
yeah. I mean, I've had a few friends over the years who would call me D, and that didn't really bother me. That was fine, you know. But like Danny or Dan, you know, like that just, I don't know, just felt too. I don't know why it mattered, but yeah, like I think that's just, like I said, just sort of tied to your identity.
yeah, yeah. And I think that at some point you get like a little bit more stickiness about it. Sometimes like, I don't care, you know. Like,
Right.
is it important? Yeah, it is important. It's your name. But,
Well, my family until I was probably like 9 or 10 would call me Dano,
mm,
Book it Dano,
look at
but
Daniel. That's what I
because
think of too.
that's how that's how I said my name. Like I
Mm,
say Danielle as a toddler, so I said Dano. So then, yeah, they called that, and then probably until I was like maybe 9 or 10, and then and my grandmother on my dad's mom used to call me that for years until I finally was like, can you ask her to stop calling me that? You know, because it would just bug me. I don't know.
I
But
bet
she loved Hawaii Five-O. So to her, it was like, you know, loved it. So,
I get it. I asked my mom to stop calling me Jen, and she will not. She can't get out of the habit now. Like, I don't know why she even started, because she used to always call me Jay. But now it's like,
right,
Mom, I don't like it. Like, can you? But I can't get her out, so I've just accepted it. I'm like, whatever. Call me whatever. I'm your daughter. You had me. It's fine.
right.
Like, call me what you want. At this point, whatever makes you comfortable. I would prefer Jay or Jennifer, but if you want to call me Jen, fine. She would never call me Jenny, though. My dad did not like the name Jenny. He was against it.
There were so many. I mean, in my peer group in school, there was always like 2 or 3 Jennifers in every class, it seemed like. So some would be Jennifer, some would be Jenny, some would be Jen. Like it was the only way to differentiate with certain
Yeah.
people, you know?
Yep. So true. All right, so we're talking about employee engagement, and we read, was it yesterday that we sent the thing, and it said it's the lowest that it's ever been, right, in the latest survey. I don't remember what the percent was, if you recall that, but it was pretty low when you think about from an employee engagement standpoint. So, got me to thinking. And one of my favorite things that I used to do, even though I had fear or anxiety when I came out, was the Glint survey. Like that, not a sponsor, but that is my favorite software, I guess you want to call it, or how they take the inputs. And I
Mhm.
think, you know, when we talk about this too, there is also a sentiment when people take employee engagement surveys, they're not confidential, but they are. Like from my seat, they've always been confidential. Like I could guess, right, based on my direct reports. I have 10 direct reports. Did everybody take it? I'm asking the questions, and you know, it's there are 10 people that report to you, but it doesn't report back like in a Glint way. I think this is why I like Glint, because you can slice it and dice it and all that stuff, but it
Well,
doesn't
and it's
report like
justifiable,
who,
right?
you
Like you
know?
can interchange questions in and out, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I really liked it because you can go through hierarchy and then see like what the organization was at, then what your group was at. I always wanted to see everyone else's because I was just curious based
Right.
on what it looked like overall. But once you get down to, if you have a large team, I think you have to have, I can't remember what it was set at. It was over 13. I think it's a company you can decide how many direct reports it
Hmm.
will capture the result for and then tell you how many people are there and kind of dig down into the hierarchy. But it has to be a certain amount. So it is
Right.
anonymous.
Yeah, because otherwise you could. Yeah, I remember at Clover you had to have, I think, at least 5 direct reports in
Yeah,
order
something
to
like
be
that.
able
Yep.
to see. Because yeah, if you have like 10 people and only 8 of them participated, it would be, you could potentially start to figure out who is who based on if they wrote in answers, right? Like
Hmm.
there's usually those spots where you can, so if they mentioned something specific, you might be able to determine what that was.
Yeah, usually, okay, so that is where, like, you knew really, when I was looking at the team. So there's 800 people, right? If we think
Mm.
about the last. So 800 people uplining into direct reporting.
Mhm.
It's a lot of people. You can't really figure out who's who, and you're not looking at that data. HR might have, I don't know if they do or they don't. I mean, I think it's pretty confidential because things like this, companies that truly care and want to make a change and want to listen to their employees, they do keep it
I
confidential.
imagine that to some degree it has to be confidential to the point of you could be legally liable for telling your employees that it was confidential and it wasn't, right?
Yeah, I
Like
would
if
think so, right?
you could be involved in some kind of, like if somebody put in a negative one and then shortly after that was terminated and then they filed a lawsuit that could be subpoenaed to say, and then the person might go, I know I filled out a negative one and I think that this is why I was let go. And then if you know what I mean, like I think they would have to have some
Yeah,
level
because
of
you would have to
confidence of,
say it's
yeah,
anonymous, be able to say it's anonymous. We did not know this person had submitted that feedback. But I will say, like, based on the comments, that sometimes they would like really show who they were and you
yeah,
knew like who was
you
disgruntled. Even
could,
if it was, you had 500 people. I mean, you got to give the feedback, but if you're being, you know, I don't know
yeah, if
the
you
word I
were,
want to use this, but you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
yeah,
So that's, I
be
think it
wise
happens
about it.
from that. But yeah, if you're putting in like, a dissertation on what you're upset about, you might be able to reveal who you are by doing that.
Right. 'Cause I don't like my leader XYZ. Oh, well,
They did
they
that.
only have 3 direct reports, so we know who you are.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
But
and I
I liked them.
I was
Go
just
ahead.
gonna say,
Sorry.
it reminds me of, in our last episode, we were talking about the fact that less people feel like they have like a best friend at work and they feel, unhappy at work and all of
Hmm.
that. And I remember that was actually a question when we had the Glint survey when we were at Helix. I think it was at Helix. Maybe it was Elmer. I know one of those companies had one of those yearly surveys, and that was a question on the survey. And I always
I
thought that
feel
was,
like it was Helix because that would make sense because I'm tying it to also the experience that we talked about where I was like, this is the best culture I've ever been a part of.
right,
That very much, was a part of
right.
that previous culture at Helix. So I'm thinking it was Helix.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't remember, but I do remember that being a question. And I always thought that was an interesting question because I think that and I always kind of have that in the back of my mind. Like when I was at Clover, I would think about that sometimes. And especially when we do the surveys and that question wasn't on there, but still I would think about it and who I would consider, especially after you left, like who would I consider? And now the people I might have considered at that time have proven to have fallen by the wayside. So, it does make you kind of reevaluate sort of what that criteria would look like.
Yeah, yeah. I saw something recently. I don't remember how I came across this, but it was like, do you have a friend at work? Oh, you
Mhm.
know what? It was for one of my, I'm just curious what this is. So I went, I think you know what I'm talking about. It was local. And I was like, why am I even doing this? And I was like,
Yeah,
I just was curious and wanted to see. And they asked they
I'm
had
glad
like
you
this
didn't do
little,
that.
right? I thought I was going to
And I
study
was
for the
like,
test and everything
okay, if you
else. I'm
want to
like,
do
yeah,
that.
no, what am I doing right now? Like, I can't, no.
You had to,
Doesn't even make sense.
yeah.
it was a good thought. I was
Yeah, I know.
willing
Your
to
heart is in the right
put in the
place.
effort at that point. But then once I got to the studying part of it, I was like, yeah, I don't think this is me. But they had this questionnaire. So you went in, right? And then they pulled you into the front. It was in a building like they had like a WeWork space. And it wasn't WeWorks, but it was something. So you come in and they have these tables set up. They had like a front reception area and you sign in your name or whatever else. And then you give them your information. They have you fill out this questionnaire. Keep in mind, the room you're supposed to sit in, you can see like from point A to point B. So then you fill out this questionnaire in my scribble handwriting because I should not be writing anything really. So I'm like,
I just
and
have
then they
such.
look at it, how you answer it. Like you answer like 1 through 10. I don't know. Like, do
Mhm.
you like have friends at work or make friends with the people you work with? Because they wanted a culture environment where, everybody's a team and you're working together and things like that.
Right.
So you ask the questions or whatever. That's where I actually saw it at. And then based on how you answered the questions, you were going into that little room or not, you
Oh,
know? So if you didn't answer, but I don't know what their fail rate might have been. If there had one person walked out in the middle, or like they got a call and just left their whole paper there and walked out.
right.
But
Or they're
yeah,
like,
so
I don't do this. Yeah.
it can't be like a lot of people are screened out of that process. But I thought it
Right.
was interesting that they had it in there because they want that engagement. You're with the other people all the time. You're working together, as a team, like you're a duo sometimes and things like that. So
Yeah, well, that makes sense because if it is that type of, environment where you have to work as part of a team, you kind of want to know, are these people sort of predisposed to being part of a team? Because I think that's less common now, it seems like.
Mhm.
I saw something about that where people are more, not just less, they're happier to be alone now. Like there's that, like those jokes and those memes online of like, yay, somebody canceled the plans that we had. And, like that kind of thing. Like it's become part of it's just like culturally part of what's going on in the world right now is that people are excited to not do things as opposed to
Mhm.
do things. Right. And I think some of it is just the world we live in today, right? People are, everything's so many places are crowded, it's loud, it's expensive. There's a lot of factors I think that can play into. Whereas when I was like in my 20s, I couldn't imagine not going out with my friends on the weekend. Like, what?
I could. I had the boys.
Right. Well,
Yeah,
yeah, but you know what I mean? Like there,
I didn't get to go out much, Danielle. You know what?
it's
I wouldn't trade it for the world. I wouldn't trade.
no, I know.
I
I
love
know.
them,
I
both of them.
remember I had a friend that I work with who she turned 21 while she was pregnant. And so she couldn't ever go. And then like the first year, and then we took her out for like her 22nd birthday or something, as though it was her first, because she didn't get to go out on her 21st. And she was just like so excited, like, yay, I finally get to go out, go to and now that sounds awful to me, like going to a bar and hanging out and, you know,
Hmm.
sounds not fun.
Yeah, I had a saying. It was, what was it? I think it was 41 and done. Like they think that's when they were both 18, over 18.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
then I knew I was on my, other side of, well, you still have to, when they're in college and stuff like that. And
Oh, sure. Well, and
in
they're
the
always
house,
going to be your
right?
child.
But at the same time, it was like, oh, they're actually,
You
old
made it.
enough where
You kept them alive for 18
I
years.
did. It was a big feat. So proud of myself. I did
It,
that with help of,
Good.
others, many others, you included and Kevin included,
Well, yeah.
I had
Yeah.
help
It
along the
takes
way.
a village, as they say.
It does, and it did, right? Like when I think about all the people that I've worked with that have actually met my kids or even through video or things like that, you know what I mean? Like it's pretty cool. Like when they come in and they pop in like, hey, and then you knew them when they were what, 5,
I know. I know. I mean, I remember the first time
maybe
I
7?
talked to you in a while where I heard Caleb in the background. I'm like, who is this full grown man that I'm hearing? That was kind of crazy. And then chatting with him last week, I told you, like, I was really had like a proud moment of like, wow, look at him. He's really, he's done good. You've done good. Like, that's. That's great. So cool to
Sometimes he can clean up the language, but one word that he
couldn't,
was like,
who
"Can you not?"
couldn't, but no, but he's smart. He well,
Yeah.
he knows what he's doing. He's ambitious, and like you can tell, like, okay, he turned out well.
The kind of kid you have there.
Right.
But yeah, so in the engagement, so I think, like that kind of plays into it too. Like when I think about all the places that I've been and the boys and them growing up and people being interested in them, because I remember a really long time ago, like this is years ago. This is probably before Elmer, and maybe it was somewhere at Orbital, and I cannot remember who said this, and I wouldn't say if I did remember anyways. But they told me to not mention ever that I had kids. Like that, you don't mention that. You don't mention it to like, and you know what actually was a superpower. So here's what I also believe in too, is if you can find something that can break someone's stereotype of you, no matter what that is, you use it and use it to your advantage, especially if you're doing client relationships, you're doing on teams, on things, because it opens people's mind and perspectives to you. So when I would say, no matter how old I was, especially as I started to get a little bit further in my career and my kids got a little bit older, and I know there are some people in the workplace that are like, my kids, and they're like, your kids don't work here, shush it. So not that over like extreme thing, but, just to be able to break that thought process and that mindset where I'd be like, oh yeah, my son's playing college football. And they would look at me and go, how do you have a son that plays college football? Like I'm looking at you. And that's not even registering in my register at all. And all of a sudden, you're breaking every stereotype they had or every judgment they had about you because
Right.
now their brain can't collect, right? To say,
First of all,
I can see that, right?
yeah,
So then you have an open door.
right. Right. Well, because they're maybe thinking, she's not very mature, she's young, whatever. You know what I mean? Like that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And then suddenly they have to reevaluate you to say, well, she is young, but she has grown children who are doing well because they're in college and, all these things that you might not have, considered,
Yeah, I always
that,
felt like it was like, who's this young punk coming in telling me what to do? You know what I mean? Like, and I always had, best interest at heart and everything else. But there is this mindset. And when you think about it and, people come into the room or they start work or whatever it might be, there's some things that come into your mind or, maybe subconsciously or whatever the case may be. So if someone can break that or you can break that as a person, it's your
I
best
think that's really,
opportunity to create a relationship. It's pretty
but I
cool.
think, and I think that's also, and I know what you mean about the kids, because there are people who it's all about their kids, who they're breaking out the photos or like, bragging about their children, whatever. And that can become tedious, right? But at the same time, it's sort of a common thing with people like, Kevin and I don't have kids, but I, love
Well, you
kids.
do. You have
Yeah, I
no
mean, like
mind.
I have a lot of nieces and nephews, and
Yeah.
I was part of a big family, so it's not like something that's foreign to me at all. But we just, chose not to have kids, and but people often would, ask, like, do you have children? Because it's one of those sort of common
Mm-hmm.
things that people can talk about, because you want to try to avoid the hot button topics. But I think even that people get a little nervous about asking people if you have
Yeah.
kids, because there's, especially for people who have infertility issues or have a lot of that type of thing, that can be sort of a loaded topic too,
Yeah.
especially if you're asking a woman. So,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Especially now, like
things
you
like
don't know what to say, what
landmine
not to
anymore.
say, what can I
That's
say.
what
I
I'm
don't even
saying.
know sometimes
Everything's a
what I should be
landmine.
thinking.
You know, it's like everything's a landmine, no matter what.
Don't step in that. Not that either. Not that either.
Used to be like sports and children are sort of like neutral topics, but even that, I think nowadays people get fired up about.
True. And I'm a Bears fan, so
And I don't follow.
it's a hard life. It's a hard life over here.
We used to
But
follow the
we
Lakers when
have
we
a
lived
new
in LA.
coach. We have a quarterback that I feel like can perform. I mean, his name's Caleb. I have a Caleb, so it's got to work. It's just
Yeah,
got to work. So, but yeah, no, I get that. But let's talk about a little bit more about employee engagement. Like, what does that
yeah.
mean? Sometimes the surveys come out and people are like, you're not going to do anything anyways about it. So
Well,
why am
I
I
think
taking
that
this thing? But that's
that's
not
a very
true.
fair. That's a very
Well,
fair,
maybe in
but
some companies it's true, but my experience, it's not true that people don't want to action on these things and make the workplace a better place. So
well,
tell me about
because
what you think.
I think a company, when they do those things, there's the best of intention, right? And
Hmm.
they, buying that type of software to do that is not a cheap investment.
Right.
So, but really, if a company decides to do it via HR, it's really up to the individual managers to implement any changes that are necessary. So, how do they do that? And are they empowered to be able to be good leaders or provide? I mean, a lot of it's going to depend on what the concerns are. If it's we haven't gotten a raise or I haven't gotten a raise or whatever, that may not be possible.
Right.
So, but you have to have those conversations to say, I know you're disappointed, but this is a situation we're in. I'm aware, I've had that conversation of like, I know you haven't had a raise in a while, or but we're not going to be able to do that this year or for the next foreseeable future. And, if that means that that person has to move on, then that's understood, I guess. But I think you have to figure out what are the concerns and then address them accordingly. If people are concerned because they have way too much workload because maybe there was a recent round of layoffs, then you have to maybe step in and say, okay, let's figure out how to manage this better. Is there anything I can take off your plate? Can we move things around a little bit? Can we adjust the priorities? I mean, I had that situation at Clover where I had somebody who would do everything. Like they would just take on everything that you requested. And so I had to go to my boss and say, can you bring the stuff to me first? And then I can
Hmm.
go to him and say, what's your workload look like? Because he's going to work every single hour of the day to get this done because that's who he is. And
Yeah.
that's not what I want to have happen. I don't want him to get burned out or feel frustrated or whatever. So I think it really kind of depends on what the concerns are. If it is a situation of you've gone through a lot of layoffs and people are hesitant and nervous and anxious about what's going on, there's not a lot you can do about them except for just kind of keep the conversation going and saying, if you're anxious about something, if you are
Hmm.
worried, please come to me, let me know what's going on. That's what I've always tried to do as a leader is to just be as transparent as possible
Yeah.
and, let them know, I get it. I understand where you're at and I'll support whatever you need to do. And if I need to help you do your job for a little while you take a couple days off because you just need, to take a break, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I agree. So when I think about the large companies that we've been a part of, whether it be, at Clover, at Med Trackers, I mean, I would say Orbital. Have we do them at Orbital? I don't think we had that. I mean, we did probably some sort of something, but not something like a Glen. But then when I
Yeah.
think about Helix, like we had a process as leaders where we would look at it and then we would say, okay, what's the most important and what's most impactful to our organization? Sometimes we had overarching, right? So if you have multiple leaders, so my peers, we would say as a team, these are the things that we all need to make sure that we're focused on. And then we would also go through them on like our large call. So, the large all hands call with everybody, it would be gone through with the total population. Then on our individual, as we look through it to say, okay, here's what we're hearing. I think the worst time, sometimes the timing of the surveys is really important because when a company has planned, let's say they do it every April, and they just got done with a bunch of layoffs in March because it was a business need. Let's say business is down. You're going to get hit on that survey because, employees are restless. They don't feel safe at work now. They don't. So the timing isn't really flexible of them. So when you think about, there's surveys out there, or there's best places to work and things like that, and you have to have X% on your surveys, based on when you're taking them, you might get, this result. And you have to take that into account as well. A leadership change can
Mm.
make a result difference. Like I liked my last leader. Now this new leader, I'm not sure. So that's going to cause a lot of uncertainty. So I think really also employers understanding the dynamic of that, and then everybody at the organization saying what actions are going to be taken are the most important things, and then take into consideration those inputs. Did we just go through a major change? Did they have a leadership change? Because when or another leader comes in and they're a little bit more rigid, like I think about one person that has time and time again always worked for me, they're a little bit more rigid on metrics. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, metrics in performance. And you follow that process, dang it, like they are that person. But that is also why I love them. So I know when they first come into an organization until they build those relationships that they need to build, and it was always a constant conversation. Like you have to make sure your team is, really gravitating to you. You can't do these things, whatever else you can, but you shouldn't.
Right.
You can do anything, but you shouldn't. So it was always a constant conversation. But I knew if we had a survey coming in the company, let's say we went from company A to company B, and there was a survey coming out that was going to show up in that survey. But I knew that. And I was
Right.
like, okay, make sure you're doing these things, right? So I think also the person who is leading the team, as you kind of start to go down and say, what do you need to do to really impact people and what does that look like? Them understanding kind of the dynamic they're dealing with as well and making sure that, one, they're guiding in the proper ways to say, this is what I'm seeing and this is what people are saying. So this is how I need you to kind of course correct and change and make sure you're wrapping arms around and doing those things so you can really guide. But every place that I've been, there has been the best of intentions, I will say, to action on those surveys when there's a lot of people out there, I think, that don't think that their action on or leadership is like, I'm just, going into a dark hole. They really don't care what I think. But the right companies, even though, like I said, the larger companies where it's been a little bit more hierarchical or structured, or it's harder to even navigate internally, even those companies, cared about what people were saying about the organization. I feel like, I don't know. Do you have a different thought?
No, I mean, I think like, I said earlier, I think companies may um, welcome feedback when they want to do it because they know it's the right thing. But it's really going to be up to those individual managers how they deal with it. I would be curious to know, though, what your take is on if you have a leader who's been in a role for a certain amount of time and maybe a couple of years, and they've done the Glint survey over those course of a couple of years, and their results are consistently low compared to their peer group. How would the company typically respond to something like that? Or how have you seen them respond, or how should they respond?
Yeah, so I've seen it where you have to get that result up, right? So when the survey comes and you see, I'll use that other example, right? This is what it is. We know survey's coming out at this time next year, or maybe sometimes companies do it every 6 months or whatever it looks like. You have to bring your scores up and you have to action on these things to really figure it out, or else this is going to be a different conversation. I feel like I was very fortunate where it improved, right? People got used to everything that was going on. They understood that their leader cared. They were driving results. This is what it looked like. So I feel like it always did improve when I think about from that standpoint. But I have seen where people were getting bad surveys over and over and over and over because, like I said, remember, I'm nosy to see other things. And I have seen where people were still there. And it always was a question in my mind too, kind of like, but
So here,
eventually, that something would happen or that person would leave or things like that. Or, I don't, the people would voice, right? So I think that's also an important thing too, is your survey doesn't come once or twice a year for employee engagement, right? You want to be working in an environment where you feel good. Like you're there to work, you're there to do those things, but you also want to be able to come to work and bring your best self and not get sick as you're coming in or whatever that looks like, right? So you also have to voice, which is really hard for people. In some companies do kind of frown upon it. I'll say your mental health is number one, right? So you have two choices in those kind of instances. Do you leave that organization and go find one that's going to support your mental health individually, or are you going to voice it internally and make yourself heard, hopefully, right? Not that everyone is comfortable with that, or not that a company would action, but that's what I would say. Like that's a tough spot to be in. That is a
yeah,
really tough spot to be in.
yeah, because I mean, honestly, if you had a leader who was getting consistently negative results, they couldn't be that successful in or have people being that successful in their
Mm-hmm.
roles. right? I mean, because if you're that upset or that disengaged or whatever the feedback is, that I can't imagine those people are doing a great job either. Why would you? I mean, if you're that upset and everything, but so I think that's part of it too. That must be that they want to, get the surveys, understand if people are engaged, because then they kind of build upon that if you want to make further changes to the organization, or because companies nowadays ask so much of people,
Mm-hmm.
especially nowadays when people may have been used to working from home for the last few years, and then they want to come back in the office, and that's a shift, whether you have to drive 10 miles or 20 miles or whatever, but dealing with childcare or buying new clothes to be in an office. Like there's a lot of things around that can cause stress. So yeah, I think companies ask a lot more of people
Yeah,
nowadays.
I know. I just know that if someone was on my team and they got that consistently, they wouldn't be on my team any longer. Like
No,
that,
'cause why
feel like
was
how you treat people to me is number one. How do you work together? Like, what does that look like does your team feel safe? You know what I mean? Not safe from if you're not performing, you get to stay and hang out. No,
no,
that's not
but
how any of this works. But
like
safe
they're
from
gonna
can I
be
go to my
heard.
leader and are they open? Can I
Yeah.
make suggestions? And it kind of goes back to that culture of question, to say, can I operate and can I do and say the things that I need to say within.
Yeah, because if you can't talk to your leader, and we've all had those types of leaders in our lives where you don't feel comfortable talking to them about,
Hmm.
or only talking to them about superficial things, so not everybody's going to be somebody you're going to share a lot with, but you should feel comfortable enough to voice if you have certain concerns, maybe not personal things, but concerns about the work being done or what they're being asked to do or whatever.
Yeah, I remember. So I was interviewing, but I was so intimidated. Like, I don't normally, people are just people, but sometimes there's these women that just have this very strong presence. And people would probably say the same thing about me, but I'm just like, that's a tough cookie right there. Don't mess with her. Sentiment. So it was when I was recruited by an executive recruiter and I had to go through the process and I had to talk to the CHR. And I have the utmost respect for this woman. She is absolutely amazing. Like, she is one of the most amazing people that I know. And I will never forget. So I was coming from um, Helix, going to this
Mhm.
company. So she says to me, because I guess they had at some point a leader that was just, I don't know. I don't know what happened, Danielle, but she was like, no. So she was saying, we will not tolerate anybody who treats employees bad, all this other stuff. Like, she was just so straightforward with it. And I'm like, yeah, of course. Like, isn't that how you should operate? You shouldn't curse at people. You shouldn't, do all these other things. So again, I don't know what happened. I don't think it was the person who was in my role before, but I think it was just something that had happened. So
Mhm.
when they sent out those surveys, Danielle, I had the highest anxiety. I'm like, oh, and I know I do the right things and I know I'm a good leader and I know I listen and I know I make changes. And sometimes people don't agree with it. That's okay. Like, you're not going to always like the compensation plans that I have to put in place. That's fine.
Right.
So, but I was like, oh my gosh, if my survey's bad, she is going to literally kill me. Like, I felt like
Right.
I had such high anxiety with the surveys coming out. And I always do. Like, I know, like, I have a good heart and the right intentions and things like that, but I always worry about that. Like, what do people think? And it had to, like, when you can't please everyone, and we talked about the 5 to 10%. Like, I don't care what that five, but that is still really hard for me because as much as I say I don't care what other I do. Like,
Yeah.
obviously, my letter from when I was, I don't know, however many years old. If I think you don't like me, then I'm not your angel. Dang it! But someone else is your angel. It stinks for me.
Right. Yeah.
You've had teams and you had to have your teams take those. Like, did you ever have any anxiety? Like, even though you're doing the right things, you're a good leader,
Uh,
like,
yeah.
what are they going to say?
uh,
Or.
Yeah, because I feel like, is there something I'm missing? Like, I think that they're okay, that they're getting what they need, and that they are enjoying their role and that sort of thing. But you never know. Somebody could,
Hmm.
have a bad day and express it through a survey kind of thing. So yeah, I think it's natural, to be a little anxious about it. If you're not, I think there's something wrong. Like you're
Yeah.
not paying attention. You're not that concerned, that if you expect it, it's going to be good. I don't have to worry about it, you
Hmm.
know? So,
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, some of the questions they ask on the company culture and I'm trying to remember all the questions that are asked on there that are weighted. I think, compensation, how likely are you to stay or leave within the organization? I feel like that's such an important question, go through. But if you're thinking about, because they don't know who's staying, who's going, like I said, the surveys are confidential. If there's a company out there that looks at who's take down to the granular level, I don't know. I think I'd be surprised because they should be truly confidential. And the way that I've always viewed them is, these are
right.
confidential. But if I see, there's 50% of people who are thinking about leaving in the next 3 months,
That's
that's
concerning.
a
That's a
that's
problem.
big, right?
Right.
That's a real
Well, I
problem.
think they ask usually that question, but also, do you have the tools that you need to be successful in your role? Like there's usually a question about like an executive leadership. Like, do you feel like they're guiding the company in the right way, or that the message and how the company is going to be successful is clear,
Mhm.
kind of thing? Which I think is kind of an interesting idea because I think sort of depends on how engaged somebody is or how long maybe they've been in a workforce or even with that company,
Yeah.
how much they're going to be able to answer that question. Because I know I would listen to like, I mean, usually there's, all hands where, or whether it's in person or online or a hybrid of the two that you would have to join. Like that's
Hmm.
whether or not somebody's completely engaged in that. Depends on the person, but like listening to earnings calls and things like that, just to kind of understand, what's sort of happening and the questions that like reporters will ask and
Yeah.
things like kind of gives you some idea about, maybe the way the company's positioned in the market. And
Hmm.
assuming it's a publicly traded company.
Yeah. I would always send the earnings calls to my team and say,
Mhm.
listen on these because one, it gives you some insight because the analysts are asking questions about different businesses a lot of times, what they're seeing, the trends and things like that. And the viewpoint from the seat of the person at the top, essentially, right? It's usually the CEO doing them. It's and sometimes the presidents of the BUs will talk or whatever else, depending on
Are
how
they
that company's set up. But yeah, you get to hear, right, firsthand what they're saying. And if they're saying our growth trajectory is down, like we saw blank decline in revenue, you're seeing is an employee understanding that and saying, okay, we're down in this business. One, if you're sitting in a seat where you have the ability to make a difference, right? To say, if I'm sitting in a recruiting seat and I say, hey, we're working in a staffing organization, let's say, do you have any or more orders? I just filled this one for you. Do you have five more or one more to where you can actually impact that bottom line? If you have 800 people and every single person does that and you get 800 more orders, they just get one, that's a huge impact to the bottom line. So
right?
I feel like listening to those things as part of employee engagement is so important. And then as a leader too. So I feel leaders should always be on those calls to really understand the state of the business and where the business direction comes from. So nothing's really a surprise if you're listening
Right.
to the information that is available and out there, especially if it's, like I said, a publicly traded company, right? When you think about that.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause yeah, exactly.
I would always see the forest through the trees. Well, I felt it, like internally, but so when you think about it from that perspective, but it really did create even more of an indicator, say, okay, this business isn't doing well or whatever else, which typically, if you're, depending on where you're sitting within the org, that. Well, I think about the companies where we were pretty segmented and we really didn't know the result until that, quarterly
Right.
review call and things like that.
Right. And that's true. I think there's a lot to be said for paying attention to those things. And
Yeah.
it's, you know, not really. I don't remember if you were on this call, but way back when we were at Elmer, there was a leader who we were on a call with, and she had been with the company for years and years and was kind of blamed into everybody on the call that they needed to be reading their local paper, like reading national newspapers, like you need to be paying attention to what was going on in the world. And I don't remember what the reason behind the call was. I think maybe we were just talking like recruiting strategy or something.
Mm-hmm.
And this was at a time when, there was the big recession was happening and all of that. And so I think she was kind of, maybe somebody had said like, oh, I don't know what the I think maybe she asked like what your unemployment rate was and where you lived or something, and they didn't know. And she's like, why don't you know? Like, you should know this. And I think it's a fair point. I mean, there's not really as many newspapers anymore, but there's obviously online newspapers, and
Yeah.
or at least paying attention to when things come out in the news, or put up a Google alert, or something, so that you
Mm-hmm.
can, especially if you're working in recruiting, you kind of have to understand what companies are laying people off, because if you're trying to hire people, maybe those are good resources to go into. So, I mean, I feel like there's situations too where people are kind of expecting their leaders to engage them,
Mm-hmm.
when employee engagement is a two-way street. Like, you
Yeah,
have to
that's
engage
so
with them.
true.
That's so you could feel disengaged, but you have to also look at that and say, am I the one causing the disengagement, or is this really how this company is functioning?
Mm-hmm.
Because if it's the way the company's functioning and you've done everything you can, then it might make sense to look for another opportunity. But
Yeah.
if you're not being engaged, if you're not talking to your peers, if you're not understanding what's going on in the business, if you're not raising your hand to say, hey, I saw the company acquired this other company. Do you know anything about that, with how that's going to impact us, or whatever the thing may be? If you're not engaging, then you know that's kind of a problem, right?
Yeah.
The people, younger generations want to do their job and go home, and I can respect that, but you still have time that you're putting during the day and the week, and you're spending a lot of your life at work, whether you're in an office or at home. So you want to enjoy that as much as possible, and there's a great amount of enjoyment that can come from a career. So being engaged is it's 50-50, really.
Yeah.
I think that's part of what gets lost too.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And then to your point, that engagement piece, you're going in there, it's a two-way street. I would always try to send analytics or things like that I know people are running fast. They don't have time to look up, right? So here's a report that I received, or you were responsible for some of those. I was like, can you make sure you get that market report out by
I know, yeah, we're going.
where's my market report? Like, you're like, oh, this woman and her reports could drive me nuts. So, but you know what I mean? So you serve it up where you can, but you also should be understanding, what's happening in the market and things like that. And some people, which is interesting, I mean, they're really not, they need to know it, but they just are, they don't go and get it for some reason. But, when I also think about employee engagement, right? What drives that? To your point, when you were saying something about the younger generation just wants to come to work and go home, I do see that with my own younger generation that I have here. But it was something like, don't quote me on this, Danielle, and I don't know if you remember, but it was like under 35. It was like the highest percent that is not engaged at work, which is driving some of that result of the lowest engagement that we've ever seen. So when you think about what we talked about last episode, we talked about culture, right?
Mhm.
And engaging in the things like that. And then that's people are feeling lonely at work. And then now you have people not engaged at work. So it's this, I don't know, this paradigm that we're in, this shift. And how
Yeah,
do companies really start to navigate that and help people feel engaged while giving them the work-life balance that they're seeking, so they can leave work at work, come enjoy people at work, right? And get their job done and do what they need to do. How do they find that balance? I wish I had the answer for people for that, but I think
I don't know,
there's a
because I
paradigm.
remember, when I was in my teens, and not necessarily in my chosen career, I still enjoyed being at work and being, because I would always make friends with people I work with. There's usually people my own age, and so you might be thinking about the weekend or the night ahead and what you're going to do after work or whatever, but you were still, there was a certain amount of pride in a job well done, that you could find something to enjoy about it. And maybe that's harder now. I don't know. Maybe it depends on the job, but yeah, there has to be something that kind of gets you out of bed every morning besides the paycheck, or even just acknowledging, like, I'm doing this because I need the paycheck, but how can I enjoy myself as much as possible? Is it that I'm going to just be as happy and goofy as I can and that will be tolerated, or do my job the best I can. I don't know what that is, but I think, maybe part of the disconnect is, people just not knowing how to interact with people in a work situation, not knowing how to trust people. I really don't know. It would be interesting to talk to people who are, in their 20s and 30s and say, what makes your job exciting or interesting?
Yeah, we definitely got to have Caleb on, and he can tell you himself, because there's some things I could say, right, but I'm gonna let him say them.
Right.
Because I think it's better for coming to him like, Mom, you're always talking about me on my podcast, on your podcast. I see it. Like, what it comes down to too, and I'm not sure where this and how this translates, right? But when I think about what we do every day, I'm so passionate about it, and I'm still passionate about it. And I had that passion when I was in my 20s. I loved talking to people and finding them jobs, and I love the call when they were so excited that they got this job. In that recruiter seat, man, there's a lot of rejection. Oh, I'll tell you, we're rejected more than I don't know what. But when you get that placement and you get that hire, sometimes recruiting is a very thankless job. But when you get that placement and hire, that is the best feeling in the world. Like, that is when that candidate is like, man, I'm so excited. Would get my feel goods from work. Like, it was hard being a single mom and raising the boys on my own. It was hard trying to climb up the ladder and build a career as I did it, but I always got my feel good from work. So I also think that maybe people are getting their feel good from other places because they're so used to technology. They're so used to social media. Like, my connection point is, if I think about it, we just talked about at a very young age, right? Was work. It is work.
Right.
I meet people out now, but I still meet so many amazing and great people at work. I want to engage. I want to get to know them. I want to understand them, because I also love what I do, and it's peopling, right?
Right.
So maybe
Yeah.
that comes into play.
That's probably a fair assessment, because a lot of young people, spend a lot of time playing video games with people who are outside of their community or other parts of the country or world. And so maybe they're just focused on getting to the time when they can go do that or whatever. Which, when I was in my 20s, that wasn't a thing. If you're playing a video game, you're in a place playing a video game, or at somebody's house, playing Sega or Nintendo, whatever, So I mean,
Yeah.
my social life came generally out of work. That's how I met people, and we'd go out and you'd meet other people, and that's how it was done. We didn't have apps to meet people at that time, and
Oh my
I'm
gosh, isn't that
really
so
old.
weird to even think about? Even have
I'm
apps.
really old. Yeah.
I remember I had the flip phone and the big. My dad had that huge cell phone.
Oh my God.
That original thing that you would plug
Yeah,
into the car. He
like
just
a
thought he
brick.
was the coolest
Yeah.
thing since sliced bread. Like, he was, yeah, I got that mobile phone. Okay, Dad. Right, you're cool.
Right.
Pay your $10 a minute or whatever it was at the time. It was crazy expensive for calls. And remember, we didn't have the unlimited calling. You had
Nice.
to pay per minute. Like, when someone would call and talk so long, you're like, get off my cell phone. You're
Yeah, because
using
even
my
if they
minutes.
it
Like,
was used up your minutes, or you
yes.
had to wait till after 7 o'clock.
Yeah, they were out of the
Again.
area code. Forget it.
Yeah, I remember paying extra so that I could have my minute start or stop at 7 as opposed to
Yeah.
9.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise it was like 9 at night. Then they would become free, and then I paid like a couple extra bucks a month to start them at 7. It was crazy.
Yeah, right.
Young people today don't know the
No, they
struggle.
don't know the struggles. They know
We
not
have to use a payphone to call home to check your messages on your answering machine,
nuts.
or check your voicemail, from somebody's phone.
Yeah, back in the olden days, walked 20 miles in the snow uphill.
Both ways.
We didn't have cars back then. But, so I think about when we were talking about the engagement and then the passion piece of it, in my
Right.
mind also came in, Caleb's working on that nonprofit, right? Which is Reach Your Potential Every Day, where he's helping people in a way that he didn't have help in high school, teaching them how to do, Twitter and things, X it's called now, or wherever coaches are recruiting, right? How do you work on the platforms? How do you present yourself when you go visit a college coach? What does that look like? He's so passionate about it. And then when he's coaching because he coaches the high school football. So when he's coaching, he spends so much of his time doing that, but he's doing the other job just because he needs an income. I
Mhm.
think that's also when you're not able to do your passions, where
Mhm.
maybe the lack of engagement comes from, I'm here to do a job. I love doing this over here, but I'm just here because I do need a paycheck. So I don't know. Did we become more of a paycheck society at some point?
I mean, I didn't come from a family that had money. Everybody in my family works. My mom worked from the time I was about 6 weeks old, or whatever. And so that's all I've ever known. And I was just talking to my stepmom last night, and we were joking about, like, she was like, I never thought I'd retire because, like, I thought I'm gonna, I was like, yeah, they're gonna basically roll you out of there and your, desk chair, dust you off, and be like, okay, you need to go now, kind of. And I'm like, yeah, because I've always thought, like, even when I die, I'm still gonna work a half day or something, because the thought of retirement to me is, I'm just not that good at not working, and I liked having something. So I would have to have some sort of volunteer work or some sort of business of my own or something that I would be doing in order to take up that time, because the structure of working and how much I get out of it
Mm-hmm.
is really important to me as part of who I am. So, but maybe, not everybody's the same. And so, like,
Yeah.
uh, you know, um,
But you also
what you're doing,
enjoy what you do. You know what I mean?
yeah, that's true.
There's that fulfillment there. And, like when I think about the retirement, I thought I was going to retire a couple of years ago. And then the business was, everything was, but then I missed what we did every single day. That part of my brain needed to function again. Because
Stimulate.
when we're doing what we're doing, we're solving problems, we're doing all that things. And even though I set up the small business, I wasn't doing those same things. I enjoyed the time that I had for sure. I mean, I could find a million ways to do nothing. That's great. Oh, take a nap? Sure. Go for a beach or
Yeah.
whatever I want to do. You know what I mean? But, one, I'm not independently wealthy. I have to go back to work. And two, and make an income. But two, the brain part, to your point, I'm thinking about the engagement and all of those things. As a human, I need that to function. And my brain has to be firing in all these different ways, or else I might get into a place where I have a little bit of depression or whatever the case may be, because I'm not firing my neurons,
Right.
neurotransmitter,
Well,
right?
I
In
can
the same way
imagine.
that I'm used to.
No, I agree, because I feel like if you did an MRI, brain scan while we're talking about work stuff, different parts of my brain would fire
Hmm.
than, like, if we were talking about a movie or a television show or something like that. Like, I feel like it's just a different part of it. And it probably isn't, but it feels like it is, because you're kind of tapping into, and I get like a certain amount of dopamine from, the stuff that I enjoy about working. I remember talking to someone, I don't remember, maybe it was you, like, after I'd been unemployed for a while, and I was like, I just miss it. I miss what we do. I miss
Hmm.
talking about it and, being engaged in that way. And, and it's interesting. And maybe this is the case with anybody who kind of shares a similar workspace or career path, is that when I've spoken to people, when you can kind of talk, because you're not colleagues at the same company, but you're in the same space, and
Hmm.
you have a conversation about it, you're kind of talking shop in a way. And and it's always really interesting, because then you kind of start talking about, like, did you notice that da 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 is going on, or how has this impacted you? And it does kind of, like, it gets you fired up in a different kind of way, where,
Yeah.
maybe people who are, I just find it hard to imagine that if you're talking to an accountant, and you're talking to another accountant, you're getting the same kind of thing. But you know what I mean, that there's that commonality that is exciting and interesting to talk to somebody else about too.
Yeah, it's so true. And then connecting with people in your industry and doing things like that. And, we've talked about sometimes I have to unarchive, like the last episode. You're talking about that, it just wasn't clicking. I don't remember building that, but we pulled in the industrial psychologist, the IO, and to do a lot of this
Right,
stuff. And then we
right.
had to do the weight. So then it finally unarchived. I'm like, oh, yeah, remember when? And you're like, that's funny. I was just
Finally
saying
finished
that,
loading. Yeah.
Jennifer. But it has taken a minute, for some of this stuff, because, I've done some things here and there in consulting and whatever, but I wasn't fully accessing my archive of that, 20 5 years of experience that I had filed
The
it away
database.
because I didn't need all of it, right? But now it's back and it's scary.
Right.
I pulled a name out of the top of my head and I was like, I don't know how I thought of that, but I'm so proud my archive's back.
I remember I did that a
Right
couple
there at
weeks
the
ago.
tip.
Like I got a name right off the top of my head, and I'm
I
like,
did. I
I
was like,
can't
how
even
did
believe.
I
I
remember
know
that
it was like
fast?
shocking when you're like, whoa, where'd
Yeah.
that come from?
I'm like, I'm back. Everyone back. No. But it did. It felt good because now that part is fully activated again. So there is these different parts of your brain that become activated, when you think about it. But if I think about, let's going back to kind of the employee engagement, right? And being engaged at work and having the conversations. And it's worth putting in. I get the check in, check out, right? I get it. And I get that some people are in that place or whatever else. But it's worth building the relationships
Yeah.
regardless, because you never know when you might run across someone again, when you might need them. They might be able to help you. I have met so many great people that have helped me along my path, or I go to another place. I remember I worked with so-and-so and they were awesome. So I'm going to, but it's only because we had a conversation and we connected and we talked and we, had all those things. But if we didn't do that, they would have just been another person that's a blip in my mind. And I have enough of those. So it's,
Right.
good
No,
to
I think it's
engage
really
regardless if you're just going to be there a short time or it's just a one stop because you don't know
right.
what's going to happen
Well,
at that stop.
it's interesting because this industry is huge, but also incredibly small. And so there's people at all different levels, and then the new people coming in, and like you can. It's not unusual to work someplace now and have other people within the organization who you worked with before. I remember when we were at Orbital, and I was talking to somebody who was fairly new, and he was like, "Do you remember me?" And I was, "No, where do I know you from?" And it turned out I had interviewed him for a role that I was filling at a different company. And he remembered it. I didn't remember him because it was all over the phone, so I never saw his face. But, then when he told me about the role, I'm like, oh, yeah, yeah, I remember filling that. But it was just kind of funny because I was like, well, I hope that went okay. Like, that I wasn't a jerk to you or something. But, yesterday you mentioned a company to me. And so I looked him up, and then I looked him up on the company on LinkedIn, and I'm like, oh, I already follow that company, but I can't remember why I would have started following them. Usually it's because I see an interesting thing about it, or I'm interested in the job there, or somebody I know works there or whatever. And I saw that I had one contact, and I looked at the contact and I'm like, I know the name. Where do I know them from? And then, but it's cool on LinkedIn. You can look at the contact information and it'll tell you when you connected with them. So I had to think back. I looked at it and I'm like, okay, I know where I was working at that time. And I looked at her LinkedIn profile and I saw where she was working at that time. And I'm like, oh, now I know how I know you. Okay. Yeah,
Yep.
and so I was sort of able to put the pieces together. And then the name made more sense. Like, okay, yeah, I remember working with her on this particular project. And so it's sort of interesting, like how connected you can be to people in different ways,
Yeah. Even like if it's just on like seeing them in their names in the feed constantly, I might not know, but then I kind of feel like I know them because
Right?
I'm always, oh, I remember their update that said this because I have that, little semi-photographic memory when I'm pulling out of my archives. Not helpful. Sometimes not helpful. But if I'm seeing someone's face or, it comes through, I'm like, oh, yeah, that person. Or someone asked me today, do you know? I know the name is so familiar. So I'm not sure if we just crossed paths or I just saw something, but it was one of the two. Like we didn't have a real personal relationship. So I can kind of decipher those. And it is pretty cool to be able to, think about that. So that employee engagement piece, it's a two-way street. It is the company holds the ball, right, on what their culture looks like, how they're engaging people, how their leadership interacts with people when they're taking these, surveys and things like that. What does that look like? Are they an inclusive environment? Are they creating separation or whatever that is? Do you trust? So we talked about trust in culture as well. I think it goes back to the trust. Can you trust the company and the people that you are working with and for, right?
Right.
So as an organization, I feel like you own the trust.
Oh,
And
yeah.
then as an employee, you own the other part of the engagement, which is interacting with your people, teams, your leader, and things like that. And then if there's not, someone like that, you need to put it in if it's confidential survey and they say it's confidential, you know what? You go with that.
Right.
If you speak that, and you take it, don't ignore it because then your voice isn't heard at all. And you know, there's sayings around that, then you're just accepting it and you're saying it's okay.
Yeah, because I think employee engagement is really up to the individual. The individual manager to make sure they're engaged with their people and they're giving them information and keeping them listening to them when they're speaking up, and the individual employee that they're engaging. That they're
Hmm.
not just sitting back and not speaking up in team calls or not voicing if there's a concern around things. All of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I would completely agree with that. The company owns almost the infrastructure, right? So how
Yeah.
do they create their, let's call it culture again? How do they create their quote unquote culture, right? Which then drives into your employee engagement. So I feel like those two are locked in, like those locked together. And then once you're sitting in the seat or you're, doing the work, you're whatever position you're in, it doesn't matter, you're a production worker, you're a recruiter, you're whatever that is, right? That engagement comes from now my leader, my supervisor, my manager, my VP, whatever level. It doesn't even matter because some companies are so hierarchical. But
Right.
again, and it comes top down. And there is some that comes bottom up, right? Are people interacting? Are people just showing up and doing bare minimum, whatever that looks like? But you also have to drive from the top that engagement. I want to do well and I want to produce a quality work product and my time is valued. I'm valued. I feel good doing what I'm doing, regardless of what that role is. That part is the ownership that you have. And if you it's not the right structure, environment, culture, let me call it, then you got to make a decision.
Right.
You got to make a real decision in life and say, I'm going to stay here and earn my paycheck and whatever may come of it, may come of it. Or you go somewhere and you're like, oh, I go here and I feel appreciated. This is the culture that I'd like to see and whatever else. And I feel engaged and I'm able to have a good work life and do what I need to do. So,
Yeah, because I think we've all been in jobs where you didn't enjoy it. You didn't enjoy the work, and maybe it was boring or tedious or whatever the case may be. And that can be just as draining as working a really hard job where it's just draining in a different way. So whatever you can do to kind of bridge that, to say like, hey, I need more work, or is there anything else I can do or whatever, because you're bored or you don't feel challenged enough, all of those things, because I think that's, for me, is always sort of the worst, like sitting there and just not feeling like you're engaged at all and bored,
mhm.
you know? So,
To me, like engagement is not, well, I mean, it can be related, right? But engagement's not pay. And that question always seems to come up on the employee surveys. And sometimes within a business, you can only do so much. There's restrictions. So in order to get paid more, you got to actually leave that organization, right? So that's when you come back to that organizational structure to say, yep, this is my place and I'm engaged, or no, this isn't my place and I'm not engaged. And you're talking about different things and, kind of doing more. On one episode, we have to talk about all the jobs we had when we were younger because man, I probably should admit on this podcast, but I would get a job and then just not show up. I had 2 jobs at one point, but so we got to go through all those kind of fun stories too. But to
yeah,
find, right, what the passion is and,
right.
and
I've
where we
got, I've
got
got,
to today. So that'd be a
yeah,
fun podcast to talk about. So,
yeah,
all
for sure. For sure.
right. Do you want to stop there? Anything else that you want to close up with? All right. So we will stop with like, comment, share, follow. We are on all of your favorite listening channels. You can also buy us a cup of coffee at the link below. Danielle, anything else to add?
No, that's it.
All
See you
right.
next
Until next time. Bye.
time.